Not only is P. Diddy behind bars, but now he's on suicide watch in one of the most dangerous jails in the country. Here's everything we know so far about Diddy's life on the inside. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. It's been a big week for 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs, kicking it off with a federal indictment on Monday, and now we're getting word that he's on suicide watch.
Diddy's downfall has reached a stage that even his harshest critics could never have imagined. The mogul who once embodied power, luxury, and invincibility is now enduring the harshest realities of prison life. The latest reports from behind bars describe a brutal confrontation that left him shaken to his core. Inmates attacked him in a violent clash that exposed just how fragile he has become.
To Essex County in New Jersey, but it was ultimately up to the Bureau of Prisons to decide where he ended up. According to Diddy's legal team, an inmate was murdered at MDC just this summer, and at least 4 inmates have died by suicide over the past 3 years. Now, their client is on suicide watch, meaning he's separated from traditional prison housing. It's unclear whether he's actually suicidal or if it's just a safety precaution, but we do know a mental health professional visits his cell at least several times a day. The U.S. Department of Justice Institute of Corrections describes suicide watch as supervisory precautions taken for suicidal inmates that require frequent observation. So what does all that mean? For that, we go to criminal defense attorney Mike Korbanix.
A man who for decades projected strength, confidence, and control, reduced to tears, shouting, and begging for protection inside the very place he once thought he would never end up. From the moment Diddy stepped inside prison walls, the atmosphere around him was tense. Everyone knew who he was. Inmates whispered his name, guards gave him wary glances, and the weight of his reputation followed him into every corner of the facility. He was not just another inmate. He was a target, someone who carried both fame and controversy into an environment that thrives on hierarchy and intimidation.
I'm wondering if that's why they placed him on suicide watch now, kind of what you were saying, protective coverage, because he is such a high-profile inmate. Do you think that could be part of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, going from a life where you live in a mansion to going to sit in a jail facility is not something easy to deal with.
Also, whenever we're thinking about cases like this, the big federal ones and just similar allegations, I go to Jeffrey Epstein, and obviously we know what happened there. He never was able to make it to trial because he died by suicide. Is that something that everyone is trying to avoid here, to make sure that any of the inmates don't actually die by suicide?
Well, of course. I mean, a jail has a responsibility. It's a jail. People in that jail are being held, they're presumed innocent, and there's responsibility, since the person's not free to do what they want, to protect them and to make sure that they're mentally stable and that they're protected.
When I heard suicide watch, my mind went to Rex Heuermann, who's the alleged Go-Go Beach killer. Obviously, he is still presumed innocent at this time, but I do recall after he was arrested, he was placed on suicide watch. And I'm wondering if that's just kind of another thing, because it was a big case, a big name, that he was not suicidal at the time, and it's possible now that P. Diddy isn't suicidal.
That's something that's very difficult to really answer, because we're not doing the interviews of the inmate.
Fame inside prison does not earn respect. Fame paints a target on your back. For some inmates, testing Diddy was inevitable. It was only a matter of time before someone decided to show him that in prison, his money, his music, and his empire mean nothing. The confrontation reportedly began with heated words, inmates circling him and reminding him that he was no different from anyone else now. They mocked his reputation, his scandals, and the collapse of his once mighty empire. Then words turned to action. The attack was sudden and violent. Diddy, who had built an entire career on presenting himself as untouchable, could do nothing but take the blows and scramble for safety. Guards rushed to intervene, but by then the damage was done. The mogul was shaken, humiliated, and exposed, and then came the meltdown. Witnesses described Diddy as completely broken after the assault.
At the MDC, we talked about this on a previous sidebar. In September, 9 inmates were charged regarding a series of attacks from April to August at the MDC. This included 2 inmates being stabbed to death and another inmate being speared in the spine with a makeshift ice pick. A correctional officer was even involved in a shooting at a car during an unauthorized chase. Lawsuits have been filed by inmates over the conditions as well, because back in 2019, Inmates filed a $10 million class action lawsuit over frigid conditions during an 8-day blackout. R. Kelly ended up suing the jail for wrongfully putting him on suicide watch after his sentencing in 2022. Sam Bankman-Fried, you remember, the disgraced FTX founder, his attorney said that he survived on bread, water, and peanut butter because the jail didn't provide him vegan food while he was there. And apparently the conditions within this facility are so bad, they're so severe, that at least one judge refused to impose a prison sentence if it meant the defendant was going to be confined at the MDC. Back in August, U.S. District Judge Gary R. Brown of the Eastern District of New York sentenced Daniel Colucci to 9 months of imprisonment after pleading guilty to charges of tax fraud. But in a written statement, Judge Brown said if the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, opts to designate the MDC as the relevant facility, then the imposed term of imprisonment will be vacated. And in its place, the defendant shall serve 9 months of home incarceration with electronic monitoring. Judge Brown reportedly highlighted even further examples of the MDC's failings that had occurred just in the 5 months prior to his opinion. That included a situation where incarcerated individuals were forced to provide medical care for one another because prison staff was just not available. MDC's panic button was inoperable. Other examples included photographs of gang members being taken while in their cells that were taken using mobile phones that were smuggled into the MDC. Allegations that prison staff had accepted thousands of dollars from inmates in exchange for smuggling in narcotics, cigarettes, cell phones. Last month, an inmate was charged in a murder-for-hire plot that led to the death of a 28-year-old woman outside of a nightclub in New York City. And last December, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams issued the following statement on the details of this murder conspiracy, saying, Dahan McBean and his co-conspirators carried out an elaborate plot to murder another individual by causing others to shoot at the target several times in New York City. During one of those shootings, an innocent bystander, Clarissa Burgos, was killed. McBean allegedly directed this murder plot using a contraband cell phone from within a federal jail while waiting to be sentenced for a separate gang-related shooting. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the jail houses over 1,000 inmates of both genders, and despite the deplorable conditions, MDC has a history of housing some very high-profile inmates. I mentioned it before. R. Kelly, Sam Bankman-Fried, Ghislaine Maxwell was also housed there at one point. Combs and Bankman-Fried, by the way, they're actually being housed apparently in the same section of the facility. It's a unit for high-profile inmates or those that require special attention or special protection. In the past, Ja Rule served there on gun charges. Reverend Al Sharpton went on a hunger strike while serving a 90-day sentence in the MDC in 2001. This was because he was protesting the U.S. Navy bombing of an island in Puerto Rico.
He shouted at the guards, cried out in anger, and demanded protection. The composure he once relied on in public was gone. This was not the confident mogul seen on red carpets, flashing smiles and wearing expensive suits. This was a man overwhelmed by fear, stripped of his pride, and reduced to desperation. He pleaded for transfer, for safety, for anything that could shield him from the reality of his new life. His meltdown echoed through the facility, and those who saw it knew that any trace of his old power had vanished. The meltdown was more than just a reaction to violence. It symbolized the collapse of everything Diddy once stood for. His career had been defined by control. He controlled his image, his narrative, his businesses, and even the people around him. In the music industry, he was the gatekeeper, the man who decided who got opportunities and who was left out. He commanded attention, demanded respect, and built an empire that made him one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. But prison strips away control. It strips away illusions. And when the attack happened, the illusion of control disappeared with it.
Trial. In fact, in a memo supporting this request, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said that Combs is prone to violence, that he's a flight risk, that he poses a significant danger to the community. There were also allegations that he was reaching out to witnesses and alleged victims, providing them false narratives. And it should also be highlighted that during a previous court hearing, Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson said that Combs' history of substance abuse was also one of the reasons that he should be jailed until trial. Law enforcement, they even found what is being reported as a pink powdery substance in his hotel room in Manhattan when he was arrested. So with all of that in mind, I want to bring on a special guest right now to break all of this down. I am joined by Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, who is a retired senior warden with the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Pleasure to meet you. What do you make? Let's first start with this sweep by the Bureau of Prisons at the MDC. What do you take away from that?
Well, I'll just say earlier this year in March of 2024, a similar multi-agency operation was also conducted FCC Coleman, Florida, a large federal prison complex there in Central Florida where they have two United States penitentiaries, a medium and a low security facility. There had been some partnerships along with the Middle District of Florida's U.S. Attorney's Office, along with other federal agencies that have been working on staff misconduct and also misconduct from inmates as well, because they've also had institution. And I think what we're seeing now, especially what we just witnessed last week with the MDC, is that the Bureau of Prisons is now partnering with their local district offices, whether it's the Eastern District or Southern District of New York, along with the other agencies that were at the facility last week to conduct that operation. Typically, the organization has been more of an insider organization, and we would take care of these type of things ourselves as far as doing mass shakedowns. You kind of move departments or staff around, and you kind of do that, and then. If we wanted to bring dogs in to detect, drugs or different things of that nature, maybe you use your local sheriff's office or your county police or local police department. But I think as an organization, I think they're trying to be a little bit more transparent with all the different allegations and different things that have gone on across the country, not just at the MDC, but in terms of, what you were describing earlier, MDC Brooklyn has had several big issues happen historically, dating all the way back to the 90s when the institution was activated. First, in 1997, there were 11 staff members who were convicted of accepting bribes from local organized criminals, along with 9 civilians. They were smuggling in food as well as alcohol, and they were also hosting some of their business associates at the institution. In 2007, a captain, chief of security, was also convicted of crimes of, over a beating of an inmate and covering up that beating. And in 2013,
Inmates who witnessed the breakdown say it left Diddy's reputation in ruins behind bars. In prison culture, strength is everything. The ability to project toughness, to show resilience in the face of conflict, is what determines survival. But Diddy's meltdown showed weakness, and weakness invites more danger. The tears, the shouting, the panic were seen not as signs of humanity, but as signs of vulnerability. To the men around him, it meant he could be broken again, that he could be targeted again, that he was no longer untouchable but just another inmate to be exploited. The psychological weight of this moment cannot be underestimated. For decades Diddy believed he was invincible. He surrounded himself with wealth, luxury, and power, convincing himself and the world that nothing could bring him down. Even as accusations mounted against him, he acted as though they were minor inconveniences, obstacles to be swept aside with money and influence. But the reality of prison has shattered that illusion. The man who once stood as the life of the party, the ruler of his empire, now stands as a broken figure, terrified of what each new day behind bars will bring.
He has already pleaded not guilty to his federal charges. But just last week, we actually got some new info about those charges in a superseding indictment. To start with the very basics, the feds now say Diddy's alleged sex trafficking scheme dates back to 2004, whereas in the original indictment, it listed 2008. Here's what it says, quote, "From at least in or about 2004 through in or about 2024, Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, PD, Love, the defendant, and others, known and unknown, were members and associates of a criminal organization, the Combs Enterprise or the Enterprise. Members and associates of the Combs Enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice." This new indictment also ups the number of victims. At first, only one victim was listed in the indictment, which some believe is Diddy's ex-girlfriend and the first person to file civil suit against him, Cassandra Ventura. An updated portion of the superseding indictment reads, quote, Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise wielded the power and prestige of Combs's role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs's orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims, including but not limited to 3 female victims, victim 1, victim 2, and victim 3, to engage in commercial sex acts. The new indictment got a bit more specific in all of this too, doubling down on the allegations that Diddy took victims across state lines and sometimes even internationally to sexually assault and record them. The feds explained all of this too, writing, quote, Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs and other commercial sex acts. Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career and financial opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. During and separate from freak-offs and other commercial sex acts, Combs, among other things, hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal. Following the assaults, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates of the enterprise, frequently worked to conceal his misconduct by offering to provide medical assistance or other financial benefits to the victims. A different part of the indictment reads, quote, when employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others threatened Combs's authority or reputation, Combs and members and associates of the enterprise engaged in acts of violence, threats of financial and reputational harm, and verbal abuse. These acts of violence included arson and multiple acts of kidnapping, including one instance of kidnapping during which Combs carried and displayed a firearm.
The attack also raises serious questions about how Diddy will survive the rest of his sentence. High-profile inmates often require protective custody to keep them safe from the general population, but isolation comes with its own torment, stripping away human contact and leaving inmates trapped in silence. If Diddy is placed in isolation, his mind will become his enemy. If he remains in general population, he risks more violence, more humiliation, and more meltdowns. It is a no-win situation for a man who once believed he always had the upper hand. Outside prison, news of the meltdown has spread like wildfire. Fans and critics alike are grappling with the reality that the man who once seemed untouchable is now begging for safety. Some express sympathy, saying that no human being deserves the brutality of prison life. Others point out the irony, arguing that the same man accused of cruelty and abuse is now experiencing what it means to be powerless. The reactions are divided, but the impact is undeniable. Diddy's image has been destroyed forever, and every report that emerges from behind bars only reinforces the collapse of his legacy.
Diddy was transported from MDC in the cover of darkness at about 10 p.m. on January 30th. He was taken to a Brooklyn hospital for an MRI after reporting issues with his knee. This actually isn't the first time we've heard about Diddy's knee either. He's apparently had problems with it since 2003 when he ran the New York Marathon. He even had multiple knee surgeries back in 2017. In a now deleted Instagram post, Diddy shared this photo and wrote, quote, just had my final knee surgery. They said I'd never run again. I said the devil is a liar, 2 exclamation points. 3 surgeries in 1 year. 3rd time's a charm, 3 exclamation points. Hashtag rebirth. Don't take the simple things in life for granted. Thank you to all the surgeons and docs and PTs. I thank God for y'all. And hashtag team love, hashtag thank you, hashtag God is the greatest. He also wrote, quote, God puts us all through things for reason. It's up to us to learn through the things that he puts us through. Sometimes you have to go through the pain to get to the joy. This journey has brought me closer to God, closer to my family, and most importantly, closer to myself, as this has been God's will. So apparently Diddy's knee has been bothering him recently, so he reported it. At some point, it was decided that he needed medical care outside of the jail, so he was taken to a Brooklyn hospital. He was only gone for a couple of hours and came straight back to MDC after his MRI was finished. Diddy's attorney Mark Agnifilo told TMZ, quote, I cannot comment on anything related to prisoner movements. Also, I'm not commenting on anything related to possible medical issues. A statement from the Federal Bureau of Prisons was released too. It says, quote, For privacy, safety, and security reasons, we do not comment on the conditions of confinement for anyone in our custody, to include medical status or medical trips. Well, the Federal Bureau of Prisons may not be able to comment on all of this, but I do know someone who can. I'm going to bring in Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, a former corrections officer and deputy warden right there at MDC. Dwayne, thanks for coming on with us once again. You're a friend of the show and give us a great interview every time. And what I wanted to ask you about today is Diddy leaving MDC to go to the hospital. Is this a big undertaking?
Not necessarily. Only in the format that it happened with him leaving later in the evening. Typically, inmates are given a physical within the first 14 days of their arrival. And if there's anything that indicates that needs immediate follow-up, the medical team there will follow up immediately. However, if there's some procedures or some sort of medical processes they need to go through that are not available at the institution, or they can't bring someone in like a specialist to come in to perform that medical process at the institution, they will schedule medical trips on a monthly basis. And there's a review team that goes over those trips every month. And but this particular process was a little bit different because, as you know, most doctors' offices and most folks that do MRIs and X-rays and things of that nature, they're on a normal work schedule, between, the normal business hours of maybe 10 o'clock and maybe 6 p.m.
The hip-hop community is also reeling from the news. For decades, Diddy was a symbol of success, a man who turned music into an empire and transformed himself into a global icon. Younger artists looked up to him as proof that the industry could create moguls, not just musicians. But now those same artists are watching his downfall unfold in real time, and the lesson is harsh. Power built on intimidation and silence cannot last. Eventually the truth catches up, and when it does, the fall is harder than anyone can imagine. Diddy's meltdown has also sparked conversations about accountability. For years he operated in an environment where his wealth and influence insulated him from consequences. The industry, the media, and even the public often looked the other way, distracted by his charm, his parties, and his cultural impact. But prison is different. Prison does not care about legacy. Prison does not care about fame. Inside those walls, Diddy is not a mogul, not a celebrity, not a cultural icon. He is just another inmate. And his cries of fear prove that the illusion of invincibility is gone forever. The longer his sentence continues, the more stories will emerge from inside. Each one will chip away at whatever scraps of reputation he has left. The man who once lived for headlines will now dread them.
So yeah, I think that will be the reason why that they would make this, take this measure, which I have never seen in my career. Someone taken out to the hospital at this time of night for something as basic as an MRI.
Oh, that's interesting that this is the first time you've ever seen anything like this, because there have been high-profile inmates at MDC in the past, maybe not to the level of P. Diddy. You had a lot of answers in that one answer, so many different roads I could go down. And I agree with you 100%. People would want that photo. We would be talking about that photo today if for some reason we got it. So that's a super valid point. I wanted to go back to the very beginning though, because how does all of this start? Does P. Diddy go to one of the corrections officers and say, hey, my knee's really bothering me, I'm not feeling well? Would he go to an infirmary on site? What would the early process look like?
So again, after that initial review of his current medical situation during his physical, and then there's follow-up to that process if there's something found, immediately. But, you have to understand daily there are medical staff walking through the units, doing what we call sit call and asking inmates, are they okay? And then you have folks that are walking around passing out meds and different things of that nature. And then he can also reach out to the medical team by what we call an inmate to staff correspondence form, whether electronically or in writing. And he can say, hey, I'm having, I've had chronic issues with my knee for several years. And I'm saying there was reports that after he ran the New York City Marathon in 2003, that he had some ongoing issues with one of his knees. So that's how that initial process would start. And then if it's nothing like emergent, because again, if his knee was bothering him to the point where he fell out or something like that in the evening, then obviously they would take him to the hospital right away. It wouldn't be a thing where they would schedule that out. But in terms of something that basic, That would have to be looked at well in advance, and then they would make that appointment and then reach out to the hospital staff and say, hey, you know, can you get someone that can, one, keep their mouth shut, that's going to be on schedule to work overtime or switch their schedule to do this particular procedure? Can they keep their mouth shut and not expose that, hey, we're going to bring him out into the community for a couple of hours to do this process? So there had to be some high level planning, not just at the local institution and the local hospital, but obviously probably at the regional office level and maybe even at the DOJ level, saying that, hey, this individual is going to be going out for a short period of time.
Story. It is the defining moment of his downfall. It is the moment where the mogul became a man stripped of all illusions, forced to confront the consequences of his actions and the brutality of a world he cannot control. His cries echo beyond the prison walls, reminding the world that even the most powerful can be broken, that no empire is too big to collapse, and that the truth eventually reduces even the mightiest figures to their knees. The man who once lived at the center of the spotlight is now left in darkness, his every move defined by fear and humiliation. His meltdown will not be forgotten by the inmates who saw it, by the guards who witnessed it, or by the world that now knows the details. It is etched into his legacy, forever tied to the name that once represented success and ambition. Diddy is no longer untouchable. He is no longer powerful. He is no longer in control. He is just another man in prison, broken by violence, consumed by fear, and haunted by the reality that this is his life now. This is Diddy's new reality. The mogul is gone, the empire is gone, and the illusion is gone. All that remains is a man who melted down in front of the world, who showed his fear and desperation after a brutal confrontation with other inmates. The legacy he leaves behind is not one of triumph, but one of collapse, and no matter what happens next, he will never escape the shadow of that moment.